After you know how to determine which digits are significant, the next skill you need is to be able to round to Sig Figs. Now, for the most part, this is pretty easy because you follow your normal rounding rules like you've been doing since elementary school. So, for example, if I had a digit such as this, now the difference is, in math class, they would say round this to 3 decimal places. In this case, the directions are a little different. It says round to 4 Sig Figs. So the only different part really is that you have to figure out who your 4th Sig Fig is. Now we do the same way we read. We start from the left and we go to the right. So my first digit on the left is a 0, but I need to count who my 4th Sig Fig is. So I have to ask myself if that 0 is significant or not. So I can break out the Atlantic-Pacific rule. Does it have a decimal? Yes, decimal is present. I am going to start from the Atlantic side, which means I am going to cruise through all of these zeros until I'm stopped by the 4. So those front zeros are just placeholding zeros. They are not significant. So that means that the 4 is actually my first Sig Fig. Now I need to figure out who my 4th Sig Fig is. So the 4 is the first, then the 2 is my second, 3, and then the 6 would be my 4th Sig Fig. So basically, I have to round this answer to the place where that 6 is. Now from here on out, it's really just the same as normal rounding rules. So we look at the 6, we look at what's behind the 6, it's a 4. So if the number behind it is less than 5, that means we keep the digit the same. So I keep the 6 as 6. So my final answer to that question is 0.004206 grams. I've rounded that to 4 Sig Figs. If we check our final answer, it's got 4 Sig Figs on it. Let's look at another example. Let's say we wanted to round this number to 2 Sig Figs. Well, we do the same thing. Start from left to right. Let's figure out who our second Sig Fig is. In this case, the 6 is our first Sig Fig, and the 4 is our second Sig Fig. So basically, we have to round that number to where the 4 is. Follow your normal rounding rules. In this case, we look behind it. In this case, it's a 6, so it's bigger than 5. That tells us that we have to round up. So my final answer, that would be 65,000. I had to include these zeros at the end because I was talking about 60-some thousand grams. Remember, when you round a number, you don't change the number, you're just saying it less exactly. So if you're talking about 60-some thousand, when you round it, it should still be in the 60-some thousands. So the zeros are not significant, however. Decimals absent. We come from the Atlantic side. That only has 2 Sig Figs. Since my directions were to round it to 2 Sig Figs, I'm good. Let's look at one last example. Here's another measurement. Let's round this to 3 Sig Figs. Again, I have to figure out who my first Sig Fig is. Decimal is present. We're coming from the Pacific side, so those zeros are not significant. The 3 is my first Sig Fig. The 4 is my second. That means the 9 is my third Sig Fig. So I want to round that to where the 9 is. So again, as always, we look at what's behind it. I see an 8 behind the 9. That tells me that I have to round the 9 up, which actually ends up having me to round the 4 up as well. So I could write this as my answer. Now, in this case, our directions were to round to 3 Sig Figs. If you look at my answer, does my answer have 3 Sig Figs? No, it only has 2 Sig Figs. So I essentially had to round this 9 up to a 0. Do I need the 0? In this case, yes, I do need the 0 because without it, I only had 2 Sig Figs. Now that I've included that in there, now these are not significant again, but the 3, the 5, and it rounded up to a 0, and I need that so that I have 3 Sig Figs. If I was supposed to round this to 4 Sig Figs or 5 Sig Figs and everything rounded up to zeros, I would need to include those zeros. So always double check your answer. Make sure that your final answer has the correct number as Sig Figs of what you are supposed to round to. Try practicing a few of these, and it's pretty easy.